Chapter 1. The Quiet Weight You've Been Carrying. The heaviest thing a man carries usually has nothing to do with how hard he works or how little he sleeps. You can get 8 full hours, eat well, work out, keep your appointments, and still wake up carrying something heavy that you can't quite name. It sits behind your sternum during meetings. It leans on you at parties. It follows you into the car after a conversation and replays what you said, line by line, asking whether it was too much or not enough. That weight has a name, and I want to say it plainly, without drama and without shame, because most men have never once heard it named without a sneer attached. The weight is insecurity. Now, the moment you hear that word, something in you probably flinches. We treat it like an insult, like a diagnosis you'd hide from your friends. A man is allowed to be tired, stressed, ambitious, even angry. But insecure sounds like a confession of weakness, like admitting there's something soft and unfinished at the center of you. So let me take that flinch and set it down, because it's built on a lie. Insecurity is not a defect in your character. It's not cowardice. It's not you being less of a man than the one across the table. Insecurity at its root is an unresolved question. It's the question of your own worth, still open, still unanswered. And here's the part that matters most. It's a question you've been handing to other people to answer for you. Think about that. Somewhere along the way, you decided that the verdict on whether you are enough would be delivered by an audience. Your boss's tone in an email, the way a woman does or doesn't look back at you, whether the group laughed at your joke or let it die in the air. You outsourced the most important judgment a man can make about himself, and you gave the contract to a jury that changes its mind by the hour, that doesn't know you, and that frankly isn't paying much attention. That's the weight. It isn't that you're broken. It's that you've been waiting for a verdict from people who were never qualified to give it. I want to be precise here, because this gets confused constantly. Insecurity is not the same as fear, and it is not the same as humility, and mixing them up keeps men stuck for decades. Fear is clean. Fear is your body reading a real situation and preparing you for it. The tightness before you speak to a room, the alertness before a hard conversation. Fear passes through you and leaves. Humility is cleaner still. Humility is knowing the actual size of things, knowing what you don't know, being able to say I was wrong without the ground falling out from under you. Humility is a strength that only secure men can afford. Insecurity is neither of those. Insecurity is when the fear isn't about the situation at all. It's about what the situation will reveal about your worth. It's not, I might fail this presentation. It's if I fail this presentation, it proves what I've always suspected about myself. Do you feel the difference? One is about the world. The other is about a wound. And that wound is a shapeshifter. This is the thing almost nobody tells you. Insecurity rarely walks around looking insecure. It's far too clever for that. It disguises itself, and the disguises are so good that even the man wearing them believes them. Sometimes it dresses up as perfectionism, and you call it having high standards, when really you can't let the work go, because as long as it's unfinished, it can't be judged. And as long as it can't be judged, you're safe. Sometimes it dresses up as people-pleasing, and you call it being a nice guy, being easygoing, when really you've simply learned that if you keep everyone comfortable, no one will withdraw the approval you're quietly living on. Sometimes, and this one surprises people, it dresses up as arrogance. The loudest man in the room, the one who name drops and corrects and never concedes a point, is very often the most frightened one, building a wall of noise so nobody gets close enough to see the crack. And sometimes it dresses up as withdrawal, as I don't care, as being above it all, when the truth is you left the game early because you couldn't stand the thought of trying and being found wanting. Let me show you a man. Call him Daniel. On paper, Daniel is doing well. He's 39. He manages a team of 12 people. He owns a home. He's the guy others describe as having it together. If you met him at a dinner, you would think, there's a solid man. But get inside his day. Before a call with his director, Daniel rehearses. Not the content, the tone. He runs the conversation 3 times in the shower, testing how to sound confident but not arrogant, engaged but not desperate. When he finally speaks, he over-explains. He adds a second reason and a third reason to a point that only needed one, because a single clean statement falls too exposed, like standing in an open field. After the call, he does the autopsy, scanning back through it for the one moment his director paused, and he assigns that pause a meaning, and the meaning is always about him. At the dinner party that weekend, Daniel is scanning. He doesn't know he's doing it. His eyes move around the room, reading faces, checking whether he's landing, adjusting himself in real time to the temperature of other people's reactions. He goes home and lies awake, exhausted by a day in which nothing bad actually happened. Nobody attacked him. Nobody rejected him. He simply spent 12 hours being his own harshest audience, and he lost. Maybe some of that sounds familiar. Maybe more of it than you'd like. If so, I want you to notice something before we go one step further. The fact that you recognize it is not more evidence against you. It's the opening. Men who are genuinely lost can't see any of this. The very ability to look at the rehearsing and the scanning and the over-explaining and say, "That's me, that's the machinery I've been living inside," is the first honest thing, and honesty is the ground everything else gets built on. I want you to understand what this has been quietly costing you, because the cost is the reason we begin it all. It is not only the bad evenings, it is the friend you didn't call because you weren't sure he wanted to hear from you. It is the idea you didn't say in the meeting because someone might have thought it was stupid. It is the woman you didn't approach, the raise you didn't ask for, the honest sentence you swallowed 100 times to keep a room comfortable. Insecurity doesn't usually announce itself with a dramatic collapse. It works by subtraction. It quietly trims your life down, one avoided risk at a time, until you are living in a smaller and smaller space and calling it caution. And the cruelest part is that from the inside, it feels responsible. It feels like being careful, like being humble, like knowing your place. It is none of those things. It is a tax you have been paying to an audience that never even sent you a bill. And the first act of getting your life back is simply seeing the tax for what it is. You have been managing an impression of yourself for so long that you've lost track of the man underneath the management. He is still there. This book is about digging him out. So let me tell you what this book is not going to do, because you've probably been sold the other thing 100 times. This is not a book about becoming more confident. I'm not going to teach you to stand taller, speak louder, hold eye contact for a beat longer, or walk into rooms like you own them. That whole industry is aimed at the surface, and worse, it's aimed at the same broken target insecurity is aimed at, which is impressing the crowd. Louder confidence, built on the same unanswered question, is just insecurity in a nicer suit. It still needs the audience. It still checks the mirror. The first time the room turns cold, it collapses, because it was never standing on anything solid. What I'm offering you is different, and it's slower, and it's real. It's self-respect, not the performance of worth, but the quiet possession of it. A foundation underneath you that doesn't rise when people clap and doesn't sink when they don't, because it was never wired to the clapping in the first place. I have a name for the thing we're going to build, and I mean it with some precision. I call it the ground beneath you. Right now, much of what you stand on is borrowed. It belongs to other people, and they can withdraw it, which is exactly why you feel unsteady. We're going to build ground that is yours, poured by you, keeping promises to yourself, learning to stand in a room's disapproval without flinching. Until the day comes when a man's frown, or a woman's cold shoulder, or a room's silence lands on you and simply does not move you, because your worth was never in their hands to hold. That's the work. It's serious, and you're capable of it. And I'm going to treat you the entire way through like the intelligent adult you are. But before we can build new ground, we have to understand how the old ground got laid and why it was never as stable as it looked. To do that, we have to go back to where the cracks first formed. Chapter 2. Where the Cracks First Formed. No man wakes up one morning suddenly unsure of himself. The uncertainty you carry now was not installed all at once. It was assembled slowly, in 1,000 small moments, most of which you don't even remember. And here is the thing I want you to understand before we go a single step further. We are not tracing this backward so you can find someone to blame. We are tracing it backward so you can finally see the machinery. Because you cannot rewire something you refuse to look at. Insecurity is learned. That's the good news hidden inside the hard news. Nobody is born believing their worth is conditional. A newborn doesn't wonder if he's earning his keep. He cries, he's fed, he's held, and he has no theory about whether he deserves it. Somewhere along the way, though, a boy starts to gather evidence. He starts to notice that some versions of him get warmth, and some versions of him get cold silence. And a young mind, brilliant and desperate to stay safe, does exactly what it's designed to do. It looks for the pattern. It builds a rule. And the rule it builds, more often than you'd think, is this: I am acceptable when I perform, and I am on my own when I don't. Let me show you what that looks like, because abstractions don't sink in the way a scene does. Picture a boy, maybe 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing his homework. His father comes home, and this boy has learned to read the sound of the front door the way a sailor reads the sky. Some nights the door opens, and his father is loose and laughing, and the house feels wide open. Other nights the door opens hard, and there's a heaviness in the footsteps, and the boy's whole body goes quiet and careful without him deciding to make it so. He doesn't know which father is coming home tonight, so he does the only thing a child in that position can do. He becomes a student of the moods of a giant. He learns to make himself useful, agreeable, invisible when needed, impressive when that helps. He gets very good at standing a face for the first sign of the weather turning, and nobody ever sat him down and taught him this. He taught himself, because the alternative was to be caught unprepared, and being caught unprepared felt like danger. Now, fast forward 25 years. That boy is a man in a meeting, and his manager's expression flickers for half a second, and something in his chest drops before his conscious mind has processed a single word. He'll spend the rest of the afternoon replaying it. What did I say? Was that a look? Are they upset with me? He thinks this is a personality flaw. It isn't. It's an old survival skill running long after the war is over. The instrument he built to read an unpredictable father is still switched on, still scanning every face in the room, still treating other people's fleeting moods as verdicts on his worth. The wiring worked. That's the tragedy of it. It worked so well he never had a reason to question it. Here's a second scene, a different shape of the same wound. Picture a boy around 11 or 12, standing at the front of a classroom, asked to read something aloud. He stumbles on a word. Somebody laughs. Then 2 more join in. The way laughter spreads, it lasts maybe 4 seconds. The teacher says nothing, or worse, gives a thin little smile. And for that boy, time stops. He feels the heat climb his neck, and he makes a decision he doesn't know he's making. He decides that exposure is dangerous, that being seen not yet good at something is a kind of death. And so he builds a life quietly organized around never being caught unprepared in front of others again. He only speaks when he's certain. He only tries things he already knows he'll be good at. He rehearses conversations in his head before he has them. He mistakes this for being careful, for being smart, for having standards. It is none of those things. It is a boy standing at the front of a classroom, still bracing for the laugh. You see how this works. The event is small, 4 seconds of childish laughter, but the meaning the boy assigns to it is enormous, and it's the meaning that follows him, not the event. 2 men can live through nearly the same moment and walk away carrying entirely different rules. That's why this was never really about what happened to you. It's about the conclusion a very young, very unequipped version of you drew from what happened, and then never went back to revise. And there is a third scene, quieter than the other 2 and in some ways the most common, because it doesn't look like a wound at all. Picture a boy whose home was not frightening and not cruel. Nobody drank, nobody raged, but the warmth in that house had a price on it that no one ever said out loud. When the boy brought home the top grade, the winning trophy, the teacher's note about how gifted he was, the father's face opened, and the mother's voice climbed, and for a golden afternoon, the boy was the son the family turned toward. And when he came home ordinary, when he was simply tired or struggling or average, the warmth didn't turn cruel. It just went quiet. It withdrew and waited. Nobody punished him. They simply became a little busy, a little distracted until the next achievement arrived to summon them back. And the boy, brilliant reader of patterns that he was, drew the only conclusion the evidence supported. I am loved when I perform. The rest of the time I am tolerated. He grew into a man who cannot rest, who feels a low dread on the days he isn't producing something impressive, who mistook a lifetime of chasing the next win for ambition, when it was really a boy still trying to earn back the warmth that used to leave the room. This is why some of the most driven men you know are the least at peace. They are not building. They are auditioning for a love that was always conditional, and the audition never closes. Because that's the part almost nobody tells you. The conclusions of a child are permanent only if the adult never reopens the file. A 7-year-old decides that love arrives when he achieves and vanishes when he fails, and that decision gets filed away as simple fact, the way the sky is up and the ground is down. He grows, his body changes, his vocabulary expands, his circumstances transform completely. But that buried conclusion doesn't automatically update itself just because he got taller. It sits there, unexamined, running the show from the basement. A grown man can be chasing a promotion he doesn't even want, because some part of him still believes that being valued is the same thing as being safe, and that being valued only comes through producing something impressive. He's not lazy about his own happiness. He's loyal to a contract he signed before he could spell his own name. Now I want to be very careful here, because there's a ditch on both sides of this road. On one side is the man who refuses to look at his past at all, who says it doesn't matter, who calls this whole conversation soft, and who then spends his life baffled by his own reactions because he won't examine their source. On the other side is the man who looks at his past and then moves in. He builds a home there. He turns the origin into a permanent address. Every failure becomes a courtroom exhibit. My father, my school, that coach, that girl. He knows his wound intimately, and he uses it, mostly on himself, as a reason nothing can change. Both of these men are stuck. One won't look, and the other won't stop looking. The path runs between them, and it's narrow, but it's real. You look at the origin long enough to understand the wiring, and then you turn around and face the fact that you are now the electrician. This is the great uncomfortable pivot of becoming a man who stands on his own ground. The child was not responsible for what he learned. He was doing his best with what he was handed. But the adult is the only one in the building who can rewire it. Nobody is coming to go back in time and reissue your childhood. Your father is not going to return and apologize in exactly the way that would dissolve the whole structure. The kids who laughed don't even remember the afternoon. The people are gone, but the wiring stayed, and the wiring is now yours. Not your fault, but your responsibility. Hold both of those at once, because that's where all your power actually lives. And that brings me to the most important distinction in this entire chapter, the one I want you to carry with you like a stone in your pocket. There is a difference between a wound and an identity. A wound is something that happened to you. An identity is something you believe you are. The insecure man collapses the two. He doesn't say, I was hurt, and learned to expect withdrawal. He says, I am the kind of man who isn't quite enough. He has taken an event that happened at 8 and turned it into a permanent description of his soul. But a wound is a place you were struck. It is a location, not a name. You are not your father's unpredictability. You are not the classroom laughing. You are not the reassurance that never came when you needed it. Those things happen near you and to you, and they taught your nervous system some lessons, and none of that is the same as being who you are. The cracks are real. I'm not going to insult you by pretending the ground was always solid, but a crack in the foundation is not the same as a flaw in the man. And once you can tell the difference, you can finally start to look at the thing that got built on top of that shaky ground. The thing you carry into every room, the tireless machine in your head that never stops asking whether the people around you approve. Chapter 3. The Approval Machine in Your Head. There is a device running inside you right now, and it has been running for so long that you no longer hear it. It hums beneath every conversation, every meeting, every text message. Its only job is to answer one question, over and over, thousands of times a day. How am I being received? It watches faces, it measures pauses, it reads the length of a reply and the tone of a hello. It keeps score. And because it never rests, you have come to believe that its constant chatter is simply the sound of being alive. It is not. It is a machine, and once you can see it operating, you gain something you have never had before, which is the ability to question it. Let me describe how it works, because you cannot dismantle what you cannot see. The machine has two functions. The first is surveillance. In the middle of any interaction, part of your attention peels away from the actual moment and begins monitoring the reception. You are talking, but you are also watching yourself talk. You notice that the other man glanced at his phone. You register that your joke landed softer than you hoped. You catalog the half-second the woman took before she smiled. None of this is happening in your conscious mind as clear thought. It is happening underneath, like a technician in a control room reading dials. And the whole time, you are only half present in the conversation, because a portion of you is elsewhere, gathering evidence. The second function is what I call the scorekeeping, and this is the part that ruins your evenings. After the interaction ends, the machine does not shut down. It replays. You are driving home and suddenly you are back in that meeting, hearing your own words again, wincing at the phrase you chose, wondering what he thought when you said it. You are lying in bed, and the conversation from 4 hours ago starts up again, and you turn it over like a man examining a coin for a flaw. This is rumination, and it feels like problem solving. It feels productive, as though if you replay the scene enough times, you will finally extract the verdict and be at peace. But there is no verdict at the end of the tape. There is only another replay. The machine does not ruminate to reach a conclusion. It ruminates because rumination is what it does. Here is the strangest and most important thing about this machine. It manufactures certainty out of nothing. It takes a neutral face and reads contempt into it. It takes a delayed reply and reads rejection into it. A blank expression is not information, it is a blank expression. But the machine cannot tolerate a blank. It fills every silence with a story, and the story is almost always about your inadequacy. Someone doesn't laugh, and the machine tells you they think you're a fool. And the machine tells you they've decided you don't matter. The raw material is neutral. The interpretation is not, and the interpretation always seems to run in one direction. And the machine does not only work in the past tense. If it only replayed what had already happened, you might at least get some peace before an event. But it runs in the other direction too. Forward, rehearsing what hasn't happened yet. Before the call, before the date, before the walk into the party. It stages the whole thing in advance and hands you the imagined reactions of people who aren't even in the room yet. It shows you the woman's face going flat. It shows you the client, unconvinced. It scripts the awkward pause and lets you feel the sting of it hours early, for free. So you arrive at the actual moment already tired, already braced, having lived the rejection 3 times in your head before anyone said a word. Then the machine watches the real event through the surveillance function. And afterward, it replays the whole thing on a loop. Do you see the trap? You pay for every interaction 3 times over. Once in anticipation, once in the living, and once in the replay. The single event that another man simply has and forgets, you rent space to for a week. This is why you are so tired. It was never the conversations themselves. Any one of them was survivable. It is that you have been holding each one in your mind, from long before it began to long after it ended, running a simulation that costs real energy and returns nothing but the same verdict it started with. Let me show you the machine in full operation, because you will recognize it the moment you see it running in someone else. Picture a man named Daniel. On a Tuesday afternoon, he sends his boss a message, something ordinary, asking whether they can push a deadline by 2 days on a project that got tangled up. He hits send, and the machine wakes up. For the first 10 minutes, he keeps glancing at his screen, and there is no reply, which is fine. People are busy. But by the 20-minute mark, the surveillance function has kicked in and Daniel is no longer working. He is watching. 30 minutes, 40. His boss, he happens to know, is active because he saw him respond to someone else in a group thread. And now the machine has fuel. The story begins to build itself. He's annoyed. He thinks I can't handle the workload. He's regretting the raise from the spring. Maybe this is why I got left off that new account. Daniel opens the message he sent and rereads it. And now the tone seems wrong. Too casual. Or maybe too needy. He can't decide which, and both feel damning. By the time an hour has passed, he has rehearsed a small speech defending himself. He has imagined a conversation in which his boss questions his commitment, and he has imagined his own wounded reply. He has, without noticing, spent the entire afternoon losing an argument that no one else even knows is happening. His stomach is tight. He is short with his kids at dinner. And then, at 7 in the evening, his phone buzzes. The reply reads, "Sure, no problem. Sorry, back to back all day." That is the whole thing. There was no verdict. There was never a verdict. His boss was in meetings, the way people are in meetings, and the 2 hours of catastrophe Daniel constructed were built entirely out of a silence that meant nothing at all. Every dial the machine read, every conclusion it reached, was a guess dressed up as a fact. And here is the part I need you to sit with. If the reply had never come, Daniel would still believe the story. He would have gone to bed certain he had disappointed a man who had simply been busy. That is the whole trick of the machine, and now you can see it. Its readings are guesses, not knowledge, not perception, not truth. Guesses, generated by a mechanism whose bias always tilts toward your smallness. The neutral face, the unanswered text, the flat hello, the glance at the phone, these are ink blots. And the machine tells you they are verdicts. They are not verdicts. They are silences, and you have been filling them with your worst fears and then treating the fear as evidence. So what do? You do not fight the machine. You cannot argue a humming device into silence, and the men who try only ruminate about their rumination, adding a second machine on top of the first. What you do instead is learn to notice it running, in real time, while it runs. When you catch yourself rereading a sent message, that is the machine. When you notice you are watching a face instead of listening to the words coming out of it, that is the machine. When a conversation starts replaying at midnight, you do not have to stop it. You only have to name it. There it goes again. The scorekeeper is scoring. The moment you can see the machine as a machine, you are no longer fully inside it. You are standing slightly outside it, watching it work. And that small distance is where all your freedom lives. Which brings us to the single most useful distinction I can give you. And I want you to carry it out of this chapter above everything else. There is a difference between having a thought and obeying it. The machine will hand you the thought. He's annoyed with me. You cannot stop it from handing you that thought any more than you can stop your ears from hearing a sound. But you are not required to pick it up. You are not required to act as though it is true, to rehearse the defense, to send the anxious follow-up, to spiral through the evening. The thought arrives. That is the machine's doing. What you do next is yours. "He's annoyed with me" is a sentence your mind produced, and you can look at it the way you'd look at a headline shouted by a man on a street corner, with interest maybe, but not with obedience. A thought is a suggestion, not a command. You can hold it in your hand, turn it over, and set it down without letting it move your feet. You will not silence the machine this week or this year. It has been running most of your life, and it will keep running. But you can stop believing its readings. You can start treating every verdict it hands you as a guess to be tested, rather than a truth to be swallowed. And once the mind stops being your accuser, you can turn to the thing you have been chasing all along. The feeling you believe would end all of this if you could only get enough of it. That thing is confidence. And in the next chapter, I'm going to tell you why it has been the wrong target from the start. Chapter 4. Confidence is the wrong target. For most of your life, you've probably been told that what you lack is confidence. Friends tell you to be more confident. Books tell you to project confidence. You watch a man walk into a room like he owns the air in it, and you think, that's the thing, that's what I'm missing, and if I could just get some of that, everything would change. So you go hunting for it. You try to talk yourself into it before a date, before a meeting, before a hard conversation. You wait for the feeling to arrive, that warm certainty in your chest, and only when it shows up do you let yourself act. And here is the quiet tragedy of it. It almost never shows up on schedule, and so you keep waiting, and the waiting itself becomes the story of your life. I want to tell you something that might feel like a small betrayal at first, and then, if you sit with it, like a door swinging open. Confidence is the wrong target. Not because confidence is bad, but because you've been aiming at a thing you cannot actually control. And no amount of effort aimed at an uncontrollable thing will ever give you solid ground to stand on. Think about confidence for what it really is. It's a feeling, and feelings are weather. They move through you. Some mornings you wake up and the sky inside you is clear, and you feel capable and easy and light, and you have no idea why. Other mornings, the same tasks, the same people, the same life feels like walking uphill in wet boots. You didn't choose either sky. The weather came and the weather left, on its own schedule, according to forces you mostly can't see. Now imagine building your house on the promise that it will only ever be sunny. Imagine saying, I'll live my life fully on the clear days, and on the gray days, I'll wait indoors. That is what it means to make confidence your target. You've hitched your whole life to the weather, and then you wonder why nothing feels stable. You cannot command a feeling. Try it right now. Try to command yourself to feel deeply in love with a stranger, or to feel genuine grief about something that doesn't move you. You can't. You can arrange conditions, you can nudge, but you cannot reach into your own chest and turn the dial to confident the way you turn up a thermostat. So when the whole culture tells an anxious man to just be confident, it's telling him to command the one thing he has the least direct power over. No wonder he feels broken. He's failing at an impossible task and calling it a personal defect. Here is what you can control. You can control what you do. You can control whether you keep the promises you make to yourself. And out of that, over time, something grows that is not weather at all. Something that stays when the sky changes. That thing is self-respect. And self-respect, not confidence, is the ground beneath you. Let me draw the difference sharply, because everything in the rest of this book hangs on it. Confidence is a feeling about your future performance, a prediction, a mood. Self-respect is a relationship with yourself, and it's built, brick by brick, out of your actual past behavior. Confidence says, I feel like this will go well. Self-respect says, I don't know how this will go, but I know what kind of man I'm going to be while it happens. One is a forecast. The other is a fact you author with your own hands. Let me show you two men. They've been handed the same assignment at the same company. A presentation to a room full of senior people, the kind of room where careers turn. Neither one of them wants to do it. Both of them wake up on the morning of the presentation with the same churning stomach, the same dry mouth, the same voice in the head saying, you're going to embarrass yourself. The first man, call him Daniel, has organized his life around waiting to feel ready. He's been telling himself all week that once the nerves settle, once he feels confident, he'll really dig into the preparation. But the nerves don't settle, because that's not how nerves work, and so the preparation stays shallow. On the morning of, he checks in with himself the way he always does. Do I feel confident yet? He does not. He feels sick. And because the feeling isn't there, some part of him concludes that he isn't ready, that today isn't the day, that the universe is telling him something. He asks to reschedule. He tells himself it's strategic. And he feels a flood of relief, sweet and immediate. And that relief is the trap closing, because his body just learned that the way to make the bad feeling stop is to retreat. He has taught himself, one more time, that his fear gets the final vote. The second man, call him Marcus, wakes up feeling exactly the same. Identical churn, identical dread. The difference is that Marcus stopped waiting for the feeling a long time ago. Marcus has a standard, a private rule about the kind of man he intends to be, and the rule is simple. I do the thing I said I'd do, and I let my feelings come along for the ride. He doesn't feel confident. He doesn't try to. He notices the fear the way you notice rain, says to himself, "Of course I'm scared. This matters." And then he goes and prepares anyway, because the preparation is the promise, and the promise is his to keep regardless of the weather. When he walks into that room, his hands are not steady. His voice catches on the first sentence, and he keeps going, because he decided in advance that his standard, not his stomach, would run the show. It doesn't go perfectly. It doesn't have to. Something more important than a perfect presentation happened in that room. Marcus proved to himself, again, that he is a man who shows up when it's hard. Now watch what those 2 mornings deposit. Daniel walks away with relief that curdles, by evening, into a familiar low shame, and one more entry in the long ledger that says, "When it counts, I fold." Marcus walks away tired and rattled, and quietly, unshakably taller, with one more entry in a different ledger, the one that says, "I keep my word to myself." And that ledger is the whole thing. That ledger is what I mean by self-respect. So let me define it for you as plainly as I can, because I want you to be able to hold this in your hand for the rest of the book. Self-respect is the accumulated evidence that you keep your word to yourself. That's it. It is not a mood. It is not a belief you install by repeating affirmations into a mirror. It is a body of evidence, gathered over time, from watching your own behavior. Every time you say you'll do something, and then do it, you add a piece of proof. Every time you say you'll do something, and then let the feeling talk you out of it, you subtract one. Your sense of your own worth is, at bottom, a verdict you reach by looking at that record. You cannot lie your way to it. You can only build it, one kept promise at a time. Notice how freeing this is. If the target were confidence, you'd be stuck, because you can't manufacture a feeling on demand. But the target is your behavior, and your behavior is the one kingdom where you are genuinely the king. You don't have to feel ready. You don't have to feel brave. You don't have to win the war with your nerves before you're allowed to act. You just have to keep the promise and let the feelings do whatever they were going to do anyway. The confidence, when it eventually comes, and it does come, arrives as a byproduct, a kind of interest paid on all those deposits. It shows up because you've watched yourself follow through so many times that a quiet expectation forms. I'll probably handle this, because I usually do. But by then you won't need it, and needing it was always the problem. Let me make this concrete, because it is easy to nod at and hard to live. A standard is not a mood, and it is not a vague intention to be a better man someday. A standard is a specific rule you set for yourself in advance, in the calm, about how you will behave when the moment gets hard, so that you are not renegotiating it in the heat with a nervous system that wants to flee. Marcus did not decide on the morning of the presentation whether he would go through with it. He had decided long before that he was a man who does the thing he said he would do, and the morning was simply the bill coming due on a decision already made. This is the quiet power of a standard. It moves the choice out of the trembling present and into the steady past, where you are thinking clearly. So when your hands are shaking and every cell is voting to reschedule, there is no vote to hold, because you already cast it. You are not asking, in the moment, do I feel up to this? You are only asking, is this the thing I said I'd do? And if it is, you go, and you let the feelings ride along in the passenger seat where they belong. Decide who you are when it is easy, so that the man you already decided to be is the one who shows up when it is hard. This is the reframe the whole book stands on, so let it settle before we go further. Stop trying to feel like a stronger man. Start behaving like one, on the gray days especially, and let the feelings catch up in their own time. The ground you're looking for was never a mood you had to summon. It was always a record you had to build. And if self-respect is built out of promises kept, then we should look closely at the machinery that has spent years talking you out of keeping them. That voice in your head, forever measuring you against everyone else, which is where we turn next. Chapter 5. The Comparison Trap. Count, if you can, the number of times you measured yourself against another man today. Not consciously, most of them. A glance, a comparison, a quiet ranking, done and gone before you noticed you were doing it. The friend whose car pulled up shining while yours needed a wash. The coworker who got the nod in the meeting you spoke up in and got nothing. The stranger on your phone with the jaw and the follower count, and the woman on his arm who looked like she'd never once been bored in his company. Each glance was small, but you took 100 of them, and each one shaved something off you. And by night, you couldn't have named the wound, only that you were bleeding somewhere. This is the comparison trap, and I want to be careful with you here, because the trap is not that you notice other men. Noticing is human. You're wired to look sideways and see where you stand in the pack. The trap is that you handed those other men the ruler. You let them decide what your life is worth by how it stacks against theirs. And the moment you did that, you signed up for a game you can never win. Not because you're not good enough, because the game itself is rigged against everyone who plays it, including the man you envy. Here is the mechanism, plainly. Psychologists call it upward comparison, and it works like this. Your mind does not measure you against the average. It doesn't tally up all the men in the world and find you somewhere respectably in the middle. It reaches automatically for the man just above you, and sometimes for the man far above you, and it plants a flag there and says, that is the baseline. That is what a real man has. Everything short of it is failure. So a man earning $90,000 a year, more than most people who have ever lived, feels poor, because his brother-in-law clears 200. A man who is genuinely handsome feels plain, because the face he studies on the screen was lit by a professional and sharpened by an app. Upward comparison guarantees dissatisfaction, because there is always someone ahead. Climb, and the horizon moves. You could become the richest man in your city and lie awake resenting a man in another country you'll never meet. The ladder has no top. That's not a motivational slogan. That's the design flaw. Now take that ancient, glitchy machinery and hand it a smartphone. Social media did not invent comparison, but it industrialized it. For most of human history, you compared yourself to the 20 or 30 men you actually knew, and even then, you saw them whole. You saw their good days and their bad ones, their new truck and their crying at their father's funeral, their promotion and their divorce. The picture was complete, and a complete picture is bearable. But now you scroll, and you are shown the single best moment of 10,000 men's lives, one after another, with everything ordinary and painful and human edited out. The vacation, never the credit card statement. The physique, never the 3 joyless years and the vanity and the loneliness it took to build. You are comparing your entire unfiltered life, blooper reel and all, against a highlight reel assembled from thousands of strangers. It is not a fair fight. It was never meant to be. The machine profits when you feel behind, so it feeds you exactly the images that make you feel behind, all day, for free. Let me show you a man in it. Picture Daniel, 38, leaving a friend's dinner party on a Saturday night. He walks to his car, and he's quiet. His wife asks if he had a good time, and he says, yeah, it was great, and he means it, mostly. But there's a weight in his chest now that wasn't there when he arrived, and he can't quite locate it. The food was good, the people were kind, nothing bad happened, and yet he drives home feeling like a smaller man than the one who rang the doorbell 3 hours earlier. What happened to Daniel? Everything happened inside him. Somewhere between the appetizers and the coffee, his host mentioned the addition they're putting on the house. Someone else talked about a trip to Portugal. A man across the table told a story that made the whole room laugh, and Daniel watched his wife laugh too, a little too easily. And Daniel's mind, without asking his permission, ran the numbers. It set the host's house against his own. It set that man's easy charm against his own careful quiet. It totaled him up and found a shortfall, and delivered the verdict silently, so quietly that Daniel never heard the sentence, only felt the weight of the judgment. He didn't leave that tardy. He left a courtroom, and he'd lost, and no one had even told him he was on trial. That's the thing about the comparison trap. It runs beneath language. You rarely catch yourself thinking, I am worth less than that man. You just feel it, as a mood, as a heaviness, as a sudden need to check your phone, or pour a drink, or pick a small fight with someone safe. The comparison did its work in the dark, and you're left holding the diminishment without ever seeing the hand that dealt it. And if you don't learn to see that hand, you'll spend your life feeling smaller after rooms full of good people who wished you nothing but well. And notice who this quietly poisons. The men you compare yourself to most ruthlessly are rarely strangers. They are your friends, your brother, the guy you came up with. Which means the comparison trap does not just make you unhappy. It slowly makes you a worse friend, a worse brother, a worse man to the people closest to you. You hear that a friend got the promotion, the house, the woman, and somewhere under your congratulations, there is a small cold draft you're ashamed of, a wish that it had been you, or worse, a faint hope that it won't work out for him. That draft is the trap doing its work on your character now, not just your mood. A man who measures himself against his friends cannot fully celebrate them, and a man who cannot celebrate his friends is slowly starving one of the best things in his life. So here is a use for the envy, because you can put it to work instead of letting it rot. When you feel that sharp pull toward another man's life, stop and ask what specifically stung. Was it his money, his body, his ease with people, the way his kids look at him? The envy is pointing at something you actually want, and that is useful information, but only if you turn it into direction instead of diminishment. Let it tell you where to aim, then drop the comparison and go build. The man himself was never your enemy. He was just standing near the thing you hadn't admitted you wanted. So what do? You don't gouge your eyes out. You don't pretend other men don't exist, or that success is a myth, or that you've transcended all earthly desire. That's not strength. That's a costume, and it slips. The shift I want you to make is simpler and far more durable than pretending. You take the ruler back. You stop measuring against other men, and you start measuring against a standard, and the standard is your own. Hear the difference, because it's everything. A comparison asks, am I ahead of him? A standard asks, am I living the way I decided a good man lives? One depends entirely on other people, on their houses and their metabolisms and their luck, none of which you control. The other depends only on you. When you have a standard, another man's success is just information about him. It tells you nothing about your worth, because your worth was never up for a vote. Daniel's host built an addition. Good for him. That fact has precisely as much to do with Daniel's value as the weather in Portugal. But Daniel could only know that if he'd already decided, in advance, in the quiet, what he himself was aiming at. A man with no standard of his own is at the mercy of every other man's scoreboard. And here is the practical version, the one you can actually use tomorrow. Stop measuring yourself against other men, and start measuring yourself against yourself last week, last month, last year. That's the only comparison that ever made a man better instead of bitter. Are you stronger than you were in the spring? Kinder to your kids than you were before you started paying attention? Did you keep the small promise you made yourself on Monday? Have you got a little more control over your temper, your spending, your scrolling than you did? That comparison is fair, because it's you against the only opponent whose conditions match yours exactly, and it's motivating, because for once the gap is closable. You cannot become your brother-in-law. You can absolutely become a better version of the man you were 7 days ago, and you can do it again the week after that. And the ground under you starts to feel solid because you built it, inch by inch, and no one can take it because it was never on loan from them. This is what it means to reclaim the ruler. Not to stop seeing other men, but to stop letting them hold the measure of your life in their hands. When you own the ruler, You can admire a strong man without shrinking. Learn from a rich man without resenting him. Sit at that dinner party and be genuinely glad for your host's new addition, because your sense of yourself simply isn't in the room to be won or lost. It's back home, where you left it, where you built it, where it waits for you whether the party goes well or badly. But there's a subtler hunger underneath comparison, one that doesn't just want to keep up, but wants to be seen, wants to be praised, wants the eyes and the admiration of the room turned toward you. That hunger deserves its own hard look. Chapter 6. The Hunger to be Admired. You have met the man who seems to have arrived, and if you're honest, you have tried to become him. He walks into a room and something shifts. People turn. He knows names you don't. He has been places you haven't. And when he speaks, there is a smoothness to it, a sense that he has already rehearsed the effect his words will have. You watch him and you think, that is a man who has arrived. What you cannot see, because he has spent years making sure no one can see it, is that he is exhausted. Every entrance is a performance. Every conversation is a small audition. And underneath the polish, there is a question that never quite goes away. What happens when they find out I am not as impressive as this? The hunger to be admired feels different from the hunger for approval. So let me draw the line clearly. Approval is wanting people not to be upset with you. Admiration is wanting people to be impressed by you. One is about avoiding disappointment. The other is about earning applause. And admiration is the more seductive of the two because it doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like ambition. It feels like drive. You tell yourself you are simply a man who wants to do great things, when the truth is quieter and more uncomfortable. You want to do great things so that people will look at you a certain way, and without that look, the great things somehow don't count. Notice the tells. There is the name you drop into conversation, not because it advances the point, but because it slightly raises your standing. There is the achievement you mention within the first few minutes of meeting someone, casually, as if it just came up, when in fact you steered the whole exchange toward it. There is the way you photograph your life instead of living it, arranging the evidence that you are a man worth admiring. There is the promotion you chased, not for the work, but for the title that you could say out loud and watch people recalibrate. None of these things are evil. Most men do some of them. But when you build your sense of worth on them, you have handed the deed to your self-respect to an audience, and an audience can leave whenever it wants. Here is the trap that almost no one warns you about. Admiration cannot reach you. It is aimed at the version of you that you built for public consumption, the curated man, the highlight reel, the projection. When people applaud that man, the applause lands on him, not on you. And some part of you knows this. That is why you can stand in a room full of people who respect you and feel utterly, bottomlessly alone. They are clapping for someone you invented. The real you is backstage, watching, thinking if they knew what I actually think about at 3 in the morning, if they saw how uncertain I really am, they would take it all back. The admiration doesn't nourish you. It can't. You are feeding a hunger with food that never reaches your stomach. Let me tell you about a man named Adrian. On paper, he is the man I described at the start. He runs a division of a company you would recognize. He gives talks. Younger men ask him for coffee so they can absorb whatever it is he seems to have. He is, by every external measure, a success, and people describe him with words like sharp and driven and impressive. What they do not know is that Adrian keeps a private ritual. Before every meeting of any importance, he sits in his car in the parking garage for a few extra minutes, and he runs through a quiet catalog of everything he does not actually know. Everything he has bluffed his way past. Every gap between the competent man they think they hired and the anxious man he believes himself to be. He is waiting, always, for the meeting where someone finally asks the question he cannot answer, and the whole edifice comes down. He calls it, only to himself, the day I get found out. Adrian has never been found out, and that is the cruelest part, because the fear was never really about competence. He is competent. The fear is the natural result of building a life around projection. When you spend 2 decades curating an image, you create a permanent gap between the man people admire and the man you privately are. And that gap has a voice. The voice says you are a fraud. It says the admiration is a mistake that has not yet been corrected. And no achievement closes the gap, because every new achievement is added to the projected man, the impressive one. And so the impressive man keeps growing more impressive, while you, the actual you, stay exactly as uncertain as you have always been, only now with further to fall. There is something else about admiration that almost no one names, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It behaves exactly like a tolerance. The first time a room turns toward you, the first real taste of being admired, it is intoxicating, and it lasts. But the second time gives you a little less, and the 10th time less than that. And after enough of it, the applause barely registers at all, except in its absence. You do not notice the praise anymore. You only notice when it stops. This is the cruel arithmetic of building your worth on being admired. The dose that once thrilled you becomes the dose you now merely require, and falling below it feels like withdrawal. So the achievements have to keep getting bigger, the audience wider, the proof louder, not because any of it satisfies you, but because the old amount no longer holds off the emptiness it used to fill. This is why you meet men who have won everything the culture offers and are visibly, restlessly unhappy. They are not ungrateful. They are chasing a feeling that recedes the moment they reach it, running faster and faster on a track that was always circular. The man building for admiration can never arrive, because arrival was never the point of the machine he's feeding. The only exit is not a bigger achievement. It is to stop asking the achievement to tell you what you're worth, and to build the next thing because it matters to you, whether or not a single person ever claps. This is what people misunderstand about the imposter feeling. They think it is a lack of accomplishment, so they tell men like Adrian to point to everything they've achieved, as if evidence were the cure. But the imposter feeling is not a shortage of proof. It is a symptom of living behind a projection. You feel like a fraud because in a specific and literal sense, you have been running a low-grade fraud, not a criminal one, just the ordinary human fraud of showing people the polished version and hoping they never check behind it. The relief you are looking for will never come from making the polished version more convincing. It comes from needing the polished version less. So here is the distinction I want to press into your hands, because everything turns on it. There is a difference between being respected for what you project and being at peace with who you are. The first depends entirely on other people, on their attention, their judgment, their continued interest, and it can evaporate on a Tuesday for reasons that have nothing to do with you. The second cannot be given by anyone, and cannot be taken by anyone, because it does not live in their heads. It lives in yours. The admired man asks, silently, all day long, how am I coming across? The man at peace with himself has simply stopped asking. He has withdrawn from the exchange, and that withdrawal is not arrogance. It is rest. Think for a moment about what it actually costs to manage an image full-time. You are running a background program that never shuts off, constantly monitoring how you are landing, adjusting your face, calculating what to reveal and what to hide, editing yourself in real time. It is a tax on every interaction, and you have paid it so long, you have forgotten it is optional. Imagine what it would feel like to set it down, to walk into that same room and simply be there. No performance running, no scoreboard, no audition. To say I don't know when you don't know and feel no drop in the floor beneath you. To meet a genuinely impressive person and feel curiosity instead of threat. That is not a smaller life. It is a vastly larger one, because for the first time, you are actually in it, rather than watching yourself be in it from a few feet away. The way out is not to stop achieving. Adrian does not need to quit his job or take a vow of mediocrity. The work can stay. What has to change is who the work is for. When you build something because the building itself means something to you, admiration becomes a pleasant weather that comes and goes without moving you. When you build something to be admired, you are never building the thing at all. You are building a stage, and you will spend the rest of your life terrified of the moment the lights come up and reveal it was always empty behind you. The man with ground beneath him builds the thing. If people admire it, good. If they don't, he still has the thing, and he still has himself. And it turns out that was the part that was load-bearing all along. Start noticing, this week, the small moments where you reach for the impressive version, the urge to mention the accomplishment, the reflex to curate. Just notice it, without shame, the way you would notice a habit of biting your nails. Each time you catch it, you are learning that the hunger is not you. It is a strategy you adopted long ago to feel safe, and strategies can be retired. But there is a harder test coming, one the admired man dreads most of all. And it is not the crowd's applause going quiet. It is a single person, standing in front of you, letting you know they are displeased, and you're having to stand there and simply bear it. That is where we turn next. Chapter 7. Keeping Promises to Yourself. The most corrosive failure in a man's life is the kind nobody else ever sees. No one else even knows it happened. You told yourself, last night, lying in the dark with a clear and honest resolve, that you would get up at 6 and go for a run. And then 6 came, and the room was warm, and the floor was cold, and you decided, quietly, without much drama, that today wasn't the day. You rolled over. By 9 o'clock, you'd forgotten you ever made the promise. But something in you remembered. Some quiet clerk in the back office of your mind wrote it down. He always writes it down. This is where self-respect actually lives, and it's not where most men think to look for it. You think your confidence will come from a big win, a promotion, a woman who wants you, a number in a bank account. But confidence built on those things sits on sand, because those things can be taken away, and they depend on people you don't control. What can't be taken away, what depends on no one but you, is the accumulated evidence that you do what you say you'll do. That's the ground beneath you, the thing this whole book is really about. And you don't build it with one grand gesture. You build it the way a mason builds a wall, one small, unglamorous brick at a time, laid straight, day after day, until one afternoon you look up and realize you're standing behind something that can hold weight. Let me tell you why the broken promise costs so much more than it seems to. When you fail at something external, you bomb an interview, you get rejected, a deal falls through, you can tell yourself a story. The market was bad. The interviewer was in a mood. She was already seeing someone. Those stories might even be true. There's a buffer between you and the failure. But when you break a promise to yourself, there is no buffer. There is no one else in the room. You said you would, and you didn't, and both the person who made the promise and the person who broke it were you. That's why it corrodes so quietly and so deeply. Every skipped workout, every phone call you kept meaning to make, every book you bought and never opened, every Monday that was going to be different. Each one is a tiny deposit of evidence into a case your own mind is building against you. And the verdict that case keeps returning is, you can't be relied upon, not by others, by you. Think about what it would do to a friendship if a man agreed to meet you every week and simply never showed up. The third or fourth time you'd stop expecting him, you'd stop making plans around him, you'd feel a low, dull disappointment whenever his name came up. Now understand that you have exactly this relationship with yourself, and you've been the guy who doesn't show up. Of course you don't trust your own word. And a man who doesn't trust his own word walks through the world with a hollowness he can't name, reaching for other people's approval to fill it, because the one source of steadiness that should come from inside him has gone silent. I want to tell you about a man named Sam. I'm inventing him, but you'll recognize him. Sam was 38 and quietly ashamed of himself. Though if you'd met him, you'd have thought he was fine. He had a job, an apartment, a life that functioned. But privately, he was drowning in the debris of his own abandoned intentions. Half-finished projects, a gym membership he paid for and never used, a guitar in the corner with a film of dust on it. He kept waiting to become the kind of man who followed through, as if that man would arrive one day fully formed and move into his body. He was waiting for a transformation. The transformation never came, because that's not how it works. What came instead was a much smaller and less impressive thing. Sam decided he would make his bed every single morning. That was it. Not run a marathon, not write a novel, make the bed. It sounds almost insultingly minor, and that was exactly the point. It was so small that no excuse could survive contact with it. He couldn't say he was too tired, too busy, too anything. There was no story available. And so, for the first time in a long while, he did the thing he told himself he'd do. Day 1, the bed was made. Day 2, made. On day 9, he was tired and irritable, and he almost skipped it, and he made it anyway, badly, in about 11 seconds. And that badly made bed was worth more to him than a perfect one, because it was proof that the promise held even when he didn't feel like it. Here's what Sam discovered, and what I want you to understand in your bones. The made bed was never about the bed. It was about the clerk in the back office, finally, after years, getting to write down something in the other column. Kept. He was quietly rebuilding a case for himself instead of against himself. And self-trust, once it starts accumulating, compounds. After a few weeks of the bed, Sam added one thing. He'd walk for 10 minutes after dinner. Not 30, 10. Because he'd learned the lesson. Start so small it's almost embarrassing. So small that the part of you that loves to negotiate has nothing to grab onto. That's the first rule, and it's the one men get wrong constantly. You don't start where you want to end up. You start absurdly, almost comically small. You want to get fit, so you promise yourself 1 push-up a day. 1. You'll laugh at it. Do it anyway. Because the goal in the beginning is not fitness. The goal is to become once again a man whose word to himself means something. The size of the promise is irrelevant. The keeping of it is everything. Once the keeping becomes normal, once your own mind starts to expect that you'll do what you said, then and only then do you make the promise bigger. You're not building a body first. You're building a reputation with yourself. Here is another way to see it that some men find lands deeper. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you are casting a vote for a certain kind of man. Not announcing him, not feeling like him yet, just quietly casting one more ballot in his favor. Make the bed, and you have voted, once, for a man who follows through. Skip it, and you have voted for the other man, the one who doesn't. No single vote decides the election. The made bed does not transform you, and one skipped morning does not doom you. But the votes accumulate. An identity is nothing more mystical than the running tally of how you have actually behaved, counted up over months and years. This is why the size of the action barely matters, and the consistency matters enormously. You are not trying to achieve anything impressive. You are trying to win an election, one small ballot at a time, for the man you intend to become. And if you want to know where to cast the first vote, tie it to something already solid in your day. You already make coffee every morning, so the 10 push-ups happen right after the coffee. You already brush your teeth at night, so the 2 pages of the book happen right before. Do not build the new promise in empty air where it has to survive on willpower alone. Anchor it to a thing you already do without thinking, and let the old reliable habit carry the new one on its back until the new one can stand up by itself. And here is the second rule, the one that will carry you through the inevitable bad days. You are allowed to miss once. You are not allowed to miss twice. Life happens. You'll get sick. You'll travel. Some day will fall apart in your hands, and the walk won't happen. The push-up won't happen. Fine. 1 miss is an accident. But 2 misses in a row is the beginning of the old story, the one where you slowly stop showing up for yourself again. So the rule is simple and unbreakable. Never break the chain twice. If you skipped yesterday, then today is not optional. Today is sacred. You drag yourself back the very next day, no matter how small the action has to shrink to make it possible. Missing once is human. Missing twice is a decision, and it's the decision that undoes you. Notice what we are not talking about here. We are not talking about integrity as a performance for other people, being seen as reliable, being praised as a man of his word. That's still the approval machine wearing a respectable disguise. The integrity I'm pointing at is entirely internal. It's about the alignment between the man who makes the promise at night and the man who has to keep it in the morning. No one will ever congratulate you for making your bed or for that one push-up. There's no audience. That's the whole point. You're doing it in the dark, for no one. And that's precisely why it builds something real, because it can't be motivated by anyone's opinion but your own. So start today, and start smaller than your pride wants you to. Pick one thing so modest you're almost embarrassed to name it, and then keep it, tomorrow and the day after. And when you slip, come back the very next day, without fail. Let the clerk in the back office fill page after page with the same quiet word. Kept, kept, kept. That word, written enough times, becomes a floor you can stand on. But keeping promises to yourself will lead you, sooner or later, to a harder threshold. The moment when doing the right thing by your own standards means someone else is displeased with you. And learning to stand steady inside another person's disapproval is a discipline all its own, which is where we turn next. Chapter 8. Learning to sit in disapproval. One kind of pain has probably run your life more than you'd like to admit, and it isn't physical. It's the pain of knowing that someone, somewhere, is displeased with you. Maybe they frowned. Maybe they went quiet. Maybe they simply didn't laugh at the thing you said, and now you're replaying it, adjusting yourself, wondering how to win them back. For most of your life, that feeling has functioned like a fire alarm. The moment it goes off, you scramble to shut it down. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You soften a reasonable position. You laugh along with something that offends you. You say yes when every honest part of you is screaming no. And you tell yourself this is just being kind, being easygoing, being a good guy. But underneath the story is a simpler truth. You cannot stand the sensation of being disliked, so you will pay almost any price to make it stop. I want you to understand something that will change how you carry yourself for the rest of your life. The ability to tolerate someone's disapproval is not a personality trait you were born with or without. It is a capacity. And capacities can be trained, the same way a man who has never lifted anything heavy can, over months, become someone who moves weight that once seemed impossible. Your discomfort with being judged is not a permanent flaw in your wiring. It is an untrained muscle. It feels overwhelming right now for the same reason a heavy barbell feels overwhelming to a body that has never carried load. Not because you are broken, because you have never practiced. Let me be clear about what we are and are not aiming for, because men get this wrong constantly. The goal is not to stop caring what anyone thinks. That is a fantasy sold by loud men on the internet, and it isn't even desirable. A man who genuinely feels nothing when others are displeased with him is not free. He is disconnected, and usually a little cruel. Caring about how you affect people is part of being a decent human being. We are not trying to kill that. What we are trying to end is the collapse, the instant folding, the way a single flicker of someone's displeasure can knock you off your own ground and send you scrambling to rearrange yourself around their comfort. You can feel the discomfort of another person's disapproval and remain standing. Feel it and stay intact. That is the whole skill. Not numbness, steadiness. Picture a man named Daniel. He works in a mint-sized company, and there's a colleague, Grant, who has learned over the years that Daniel can be moved. Grant is the kind of man who treats other people's evenings and weekends as his personal reserve. One Thursday afternoon, at 4:45, Grant drops a heavy request on Daniel's desk. He needs a full report reworked by morning, a report that isn't Daniel's responsibility, for a meeting that is entirely Grant's problem. And he doesn't ask. He assumes. He's already half-turned to walk away, confident, because this has always worked before. The old Daniel would have felt his stomach drop and heard himself say, "Sure, no problem, I'll figure it out." He'd have canceled dinner with his sister. He'd have sat there until 9 at night, resentful and silent, buying Grant's approval with his own evening. But this Daniel has been practicing, so he feels the familiar surge, that hot flash of anxiety, and instead of obeying it, he notices it. He takes a breath, and he says evenly, "I can't turn that around by morning, Grant. If you'd flagged it earlier this week, I could have helped. But I've got commitments tonight. You'll need to sort it out or move the meeting. Now watch what happens, because this is the part that matters. Grant doesn't smile and say, "Of course, thank you for your honesty." Grant's face tightens. He says something clipped, something like, "Wow, okay, I thought you were a team player." And he walks off visibly annoyed. And there it is. The exact thing Daniel has spent his whole life avoiding is now sitting in the room with him, real and unresolved. Here is what the old Daniel could never have known, because he always caved before he could find out. The disapproval doesn't kill you. Daniel sits at his desk, his heart pounding, that awful itch to run after Grant and take it all back. And he doesn't. He just breathes and lets the discomfort exist. It's uncomfortable. It's genuinely unpleasant. And it passes. By the time he's driving to meet his sister, the intensity has already faded from a roar to a murmur. He survived. Grant's displeasure, which had loomed in his imagination like something catastrophic, turned out to be a passing weather system. Uncomfortable, and then gone. And Daniel walks into that dinner, having kept a promise to himself and to his sister, standing on his own ground for the first time in a long time. That is the lesson your body needs, and it can only learn it by living through it. You cannot think your way out of this fear. You cannot read enough or reason enough to make it disappear from the safety of your own head. The fear that being disliked will destroy you can only be disproven by being disliked and not being destroyed. Your nervous system needs the evidence. It needs to feel the alarm blaring and then discover, firsthand, that nothing terrible followed. So how do you build this on purpose, instead of waiting for a Grant to force it on you? You do it the way you'd build any capacity, gradually, deliberately, starting light. Think of it as graduated exposure. You go looking, in small ways, for the mild disapproval you've spent your life dodging, and you let yourself feel it, on purpose. Start absurdly small. Send back a meal that came out wrong, politely, instead of eating something you didn't order. Say, "Actually, I'd rather not," when a friend suggests a plan you don't want. Offer an opinion in a conversation when you know it differs from the person next to you, and resist the reflex to immediately soften it into mush. Let a silence sit after you've said no, instead of rushing to fill it with excuses. Wear the thing you like, even if you suspect someone might find it strange. None of these will change your life on their own. That is exactly the point. They are reps. Each one is a small, controlled dose of the very sensation you fear, taken deliberately so your system can practice staying calm through it. You send back the wrong meal, the server is briefly a little cool with you, and you notice that the world keeps turning. You give the differing opinion, someone raises an eyebrow, and you're still there, still whole. You are teaching your body, one small proof at a time, that disapproval is a feeling and not a death sentence. And slowly the alarm that once blared at the smallest sign of displeasure begins to quiet down, because it has finally gathered evidence that it was overreacting all along. Let me give you something to do with your body in the actual moment, because the disapproval will not wait for you to feel ready. When you feel it land, that cold drop, the urge to fix and soften and take it back, the first move is to do nothing. Not coldly, not as a power play. Just let a breath go by without repairing anything. The insecure reflex is to fill the silence immediately, to pile on reasons, to explain yourself 3 times, to apologize for things that need no apology, because the talking is really an attempt to make the other person's frown go away. Resist that. You said the true thing or held the reasonable line, and now you let it sit there without a single word of backpedaling. Notice what happens in your chest. Name it silently. That's fear. That's the old alarm. And keep your face soft and your mouth closed. You do not owe a paragraph of justification for a boundary. A short, plain sentence is a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence. I can't take that on is a complete sentence. Everything you add after it in that anxious rush is usually just you trying to buy back the approval you spent by being honest. And here is the part that will surprise you the first few times. The silence you were so afraid of almost always ends with the other person adjusting to you, rather than you adjusting to them, precisely because you did not flinch. But even when it doesn't, even when they stay annoyed, you will have done the one thing that builds this muscle. You stood in the discomfort, and you did not sell yourself to end it. Over time, these reps accumulate into something that feels almost like a superpower, though it's really just the absence of a lifelong handicap. You start to notice that you can hold a position through someone's irritation. You can disappoint a person and still respect them, still care about them without dissolving. The stakes get higher, and you find you can handle those too. The boundary with the demanding colleague, the honest answer to the friend who wanted flattery, the no to the family member who always got a yes. You remain, through all of it, standing on your own 2 feet. And this is where the real freedom lives, though it isn't the freedom men usually imagine. It isn't the freedom of never being judged. You will be judged. People will dislike you, misread you, be annoyed by your boundaries, and disapprove of your choices for the rest of your days. The freedom is not escaping that. The freedom is no longer being controlled by it. A man who can be disliked and stay whole cannot be steered by every raised eyebrow and cooled tone in the room. He can be honest because honesty no longer costs him his stability. He can love people without needing to manage their every feeling. He is finally, quietly, his own man, because the thing that once ran his life has lost its grip on him. But there's a harder frontier still, one that lives underneath all of this. Because sitting in someone else's disapproval is one thing, and sitting with your own difficult feelings, the anger you swallow, and the discomfort you flee is another entirely. Chapter 9. Anger, Avoidance, and the Feelings You Won't Face. Something strange happens inside a man who has spent years managing how he appears. He becomes an expert at reading the room and a stranger to the room inside himself. He can tell you what his boss is feeling, what his wife needs, what the mood is at the dinner table before anyone speaks. But ask him what he feels, and he goes quiet, or he gives you a fact instead of a feeling. He says he's fine. He says he's tired. He says it's nothing. And underneath that flat surface, something is moving that he has never learned to look at directly. Insecurity is not only a story you tell about your worth. It is often, at the root, an inability to sit with your own inner weather. The fear, the anger, the sadness, the wanting, these are not comfortable states, and a man who is never taught to hold them learns instead to route around them. He builds his whole life as a detour, and the trouble with detours is that they take you somewhere, but never where you actually needed to go. Let me show you 2 men. On the surface, they look like opposites, and if you met them at a party, you would never file them under the same problem. But they are running the same program. The first man is named, let's say, Victor. Victor is the kind of man who erupts. The coffee is cold, and he slams the mug down hard enough that his kids flinch. Someone cuts him off in traffic, and he's leaning on the horn, jaw tight, narrating the other driver's sins out loud for the next 10 minutes. His wife forgets to mention that her mother is coming Sunday, and suddenly it's a whole thing, a disproportionate thing, a why does nobody tell me anything thing. From the outside, Victor looks like a man overflowing with feeling. Too much feeling, you'd think. But that's the illusion. Victor isn't feeling too much. Victor is feeling one thing, anger, because anger is the only door in the house that he knows how to open. Underneath the anger is something he has never once looked at. Fear that he's not respected, hurt that he wasn't considered, a small boy's ache to matter. But those feelings are soft, and softness terrified him a long time ago, so they get instantly converted at the border into the one currency he trusts: heat. Victor doesn't explode because he's strong. He explodes because he cannot tolerate the vulnerable feeling that comes a half second before the anger. The anger is the escape hatch. Now meet the second man. Call him Rowan. Rowan would never slam a mug. Rowan is gentle, agreeable, easy to be around. Ask Rowan where he wants to eat, and he says, wherever you want. Ask him what movie, he says, I'm good with anything. His girlfriend has been unhappy for months, and he can feel it, but he says nothing. Because saying something might start a conflict, and conflict is a fire he learned to smother before it catches. A younger man takes credit for Rowan's idea in a meeting, and Rowan just nods and smiles, and goes home and stews about it for 3 days without ever saying a word to anyone. Rowan looks like the calm one, the mature one, but Rowan is running from the exact same thing Victor is. Rowan cannot tolerate the discomfort of wanting something and risking that he won't get it. He can't stand the tension of disappointing another person, or being disliked, or being in the room while someone is upset with him, so he disappears. He makes himself so small and so accommodating that there is nothing left to reject, and the cost is enormous. Because a man who never says what he wants slowly forgets that he wants anything at all. His resentment doesn't vanish, it goes underground and comes out sideways, in the sarcasm, in the withdrawal, in the way he's somehow never quite available, in a low hum of bitterness he can't explain. Victor and Rowan are the same man, wearing different coats. One turns the volume all the way up so he never has to hear the quiet feeling underneath. The other turns himself all the way down so the feeling never has room to speak. Neither of them is actually feeling his life. Both are avoiding, and both are getting smaller because of it. Because here's the thing avoidance never tells you. Every feeling you refuse to face doesn't leave. It just takes a piece of your territory as it goes. The man who won't face his fear ends up with a life the exact size of his comfort zone, and that box shrinks a little every year. He doesn't apply for the job. He doesn't ask her out. He doesn't speak up in the meeting. He doesn't book the trip. Each avoidance feels like relief in the moment and costs him a room in the house of his own life. Give it 20 years, and he's living in a closet, wondering why the walls are so close. It is worth asking why this is so much harder for men, because you did not invent your discomfort with your own inner life. You were trained into it. Somewhere early, you learned that the soft feelings, fear, hurt, loneliness, the wish to be held or reassured, were dangerous to show, that a boy who revealed them got mocked or shamed, or simply left more alone than before. So you did the sensible thing. You built a lid. You learned to convert everything that might look weak into something that looked acceptable. And for a lot of men, the only acceptable strong-looking feeling is anger, which is why so many carry one loud emotion sitting on top of a dozen quiet ones they never learn to name. But watch how this connects to everything we have already covered, because it is the hidden engine underneath all of it. The man who cannot feel his own fear has to manage it some other way, so he manages the room instead, scanning faces, chasing approval, rehearsing conversations, doing all the exhausting external work we have spent this book naming. The insecurity you have been fighting on the surface is very often just an unfelt feeling wearing a disguise. The approval-seeking, the comparison, the need to be admired, the collapse in the face of disapproval. Trace almost any of them down far enough, and you find a man who never learned he could simply feel the thing and survive it. That is why this chapter sits where it does. Learn to face what rises in you, and you starve half of your insecurity at the root, because it was feeding on your refusal to feel all along. So what do you actually do? Not in a clinical way, not with a workbook, but as a man who wants to stop being run by what he won't look at. The first thing is almost embarrassingly simple. You learn to notice the feeling before you act on it. There is always a gap, even if it's only a breath wide, between the thing that happens and the thing you do about it. Victor's whole practice is finding that gap. The mug is cold, the heat rises, and instead of slamming, he pauses 1 single second and asks, what am I actually feeling right now, underneath the anger? The first few hundred times, the answer is, I don't know. That's fine. The pause itself is the muscle. You're teaching yourself that a feeling is something you can hold in your hand and look at, not something that has to instantly become a behavior. The second thing is to name it, plainly, to yourself, without dressing it up. There's a real power in putting the true word on the true thing. Not "I'm stressed," which is a fog, but "I'm scared she's losing interest in me." Not "I'm annoyed," but "I felt humiliated when he took the credit," and "I'm angry," and "I'm hurt." The specific word does something the vague word can't. It takes the feeling out of the basement, where it runs the house in the dark, and brings it up into the light, where you can actually deal with it. You are not indulging it by naming it. You are containing it. A named feeling has edges. An unnamed one leaks into everything. The third thing is to let yourself physically feel it without doing anything about it. This is the part men avoid the most, because it feels like weakness, like sitting in the discomfort with no exit. But it's the opposite of weakness. When the anxiety comes, you don't have to fix it or flee it. You can just notice, my chest is tight, my jaw is clenched, my stomach is cold, and breathe, and let it move through you like weather. Feelings, when you stop fighting them, actually pass. They rise, they crest, they fall. The man who won't feel them is the man who keeps them frozen at high tide forever. And the strange gift on the other side is that once you've proven to yourself that you can survive the feeling, you stop being afraid of it. And when you stop being afraid of your own inner states, an enormous amount of your insecurity simply loses its fuel. Because so much of insecurity was never about the world. It was about not trusting yourself to handle what you feel. And then for men like Rowan, there's one more thing. You have to let the feeling become a small, honest action. If you want the Thai place, say the Thai place. If the credit was yours, say, "Actually, that was my idea," and let the awkwardness sit there. If she's unhappy, say, "Something feels off between us, can we talk?" Not as an explosion, as a plain statement of what's true for you. Every time you do this, you are voting for the proposition that your inner life is allowed to take up space in the outer world. And that vote, cast over and over, is how a man stops disappearing. Facing what you feel is not indulgence, and it is not therapy speak weakness. It is the hardest, most masculine thing there is, because it asks you to stop running from the one opponent you can never outrun, which is yourself. The man who can feel his fear and act anyway, he can feel his anger and speak it clean, who can want something and say so out loud, that man has taken his life back from the shadows. Which brings us to the lighter world, and to a question every man carries, whether he admits it or not, about where he stands among other men. Chapter 10. How you stand among other men. Something tightens in a man when he walks into a room full of other men. You may not name it, but you feel it in your body. Your shoulders adjust, your voice recalibrates. Some part of you is already scanning, measuring, sorting. Who here is above me? Who is below? Who might challenge me, and who I can afford to ignore? It happens in a boardroom, in a garage, at a wedding, in a locker room, at a backyard barbecue where nobody is competing for anything at all. And still, the old machinery hums. This chapter is about that machinery, and about what it means to finally set it down. Let me tell you what status anxiety actually is, without the mystique. It is the fear that your place among other men is not secure, and that at any moment it could be taken from you. It is old. It runs deeper than your job or your income or the size of your arms. It comes from a time when a man standing in his group genuinely meant survival, when being cast out was close to a death sentence. Your nervous system still carries that inheritance. So when another man puffs up, or interrupts you, or subtly puts you down, a part of you responds as if something vital is on the line. That is not weakness. That is ancient wiring firing in a modern room where the stakes are, in truth, much smaller than they feel. The trouble is what you do with that firing. Most men, when the anxiety hits, collapse into one of two postures. The first is submission. You shrink. You laugh a little too quickly at the powerful man's joke. You soften your opinions before you finish saying them. You defer, not because you are persuaded, but because holding your ground feels dangerous. The second posture is competition. You puff up in return. You need to win the exchange, to have the last word, to be seen as the smarter, tougher, more capable man. You compete for dominance, because dominance feels like safety. And here is the thing you have to understand. These two postures look like opposites, but they come from the same place. Both the man who shrinks and the man who dominates are being run by the same fear. Both have handed control of their behavior to another man's presence. The one who submits and the one who conquers are equally unfree. Genuine self-respect is the third option, and it is quieter than either. It is the capacity to stand among other men without submitting and without competing for the top spot. Not because you have decided you are better than the games, but because your worth is simply not on the table anymore. When your sense of your own value doesn't depend on winning the exchange, you no longer need to win it. You can let another man be impressive. You can let him be right. You can lose an argument and walk away without a scratch, because nothing that actually holds you up was ever inside that argument. Let me put you inside a room so you can see the difference. Imagine you work under a senior man named Dale. Dale is good at what he does, and he never lets anyone forget it. He talks over people. He asks questions he already knows the answer to, just to watch someone fumble. In meetings, he has a way of turning to you and saying, with a thin smile, "Walk me through your thinking on this, because I'm not sure you've considered the whole picture." The room goes quiet. Every man there feels the temperature drop, and every man is quietly grateful it isn't him. Now watch the insecure version of you handle Dale. You feel the heat rise in your chest. One part of you wants to shrink, to say, "You're probably right, let me rework it," even though you know your work is solid. Another part of you wants to fight, to fire back something sharp, to prove in front of everyone that Dale doesn't rattle you. And whichever way you go, Dale has already won, because he has moved you. He reached into your chest and turned a dial, and your whole response is organized around him. You leave the meeting, replaying it, rehearsing what you should have said, carrying Dale home in your head like an unpaid tax. Now watch the steady version of you. Dale says his line. You feel the same heat rise, because you are not a robot, and the wiring is still there. But this time, you do not act from the heat. You let it move through you. You take a breath. You hold Dale's eyes without hardening your own. And you say, evenly, "Sure, here's the thinking." And then you walk him through it, plainly, without the defensive edge and without the eagerness to please. When he pushes on a real weak point, you say, "That's a fair point. I hadn't weighed that as heavily. Let me look at it again." When he pushes on something that isn't actually a weakness, you say, "I understand the concern, and I still think this holds. Here's why." You are not submitting. You are not competing. You are just standing there in possession of yourself, treating the disagreement as a disagreement rather than a duel. Notice what you did there, because it is the whole art in miniature. You disagreed without needing to make Dale wrong as a person. You held your position without raising your voice or your chin. You conceded the point that deserved conceding without feeling like you had lost anything, because giving ground on a fact is not the same as giving up your dignity. That distinction is everything. An insecure man cannot afford to concede, because to him, every point conceded is a piece of his standing chipped away. A self-respecting man concedes easily and often on the small things, precisely because none of it threatens the thing underneath. This is why the steady man can give credit so freely. Have you noticed that the most insecure men in any group are the ones who cannot stand to praise another man? They hoard credit. They downplay what someone else did. They add a little qualifier to every compliment, so no one else shines too brightly next to them. That stinginess is a confession. It says out loud that they experience another man's success as a subtraction from their own. But when your worth is not at stake, another man being brilliant costs you nothing. So you can turn to a colleague and say, in front of everyone, "That was a great call. I wouldn't have seen it," and mean it, and feel bigger rather than smaller for having said it. Generosity with credit is not a moral performance. It is simply what becomes natural when you stop keeping score. This changes how you stand in front of the men above you too, the mentors, the bosses, the ones who genuinely know more than you and have done more than you. The insecure man has only two settings around a superior. He either shrinks into a nervous, eager-to-please junior who can't think straight in the great man's presence, or he quietly resents him and looks for the flaw that will cut him back down to size. Both are the same fear again, dressed for a different occasion. The steady man has a third option that neither of the others can reach. He can respect a man fully, learn from him hungrily, admire what he's built, and still stand in front of him as an equal in dignity, if not in rank. Because rank was never the thing that made him equal. He can ask the naive question without shame. He can say, "I don't know, teach me," and feel himself grow rather than shrink in the saying of it. And there is a strange gift waiting on the other side of this, which is that once your own worth stops being at stake, you start to see the domineering man clearly, and what you see is not a giant. You see the effort. You notice that the man who has to win every exchange is working very hard at it. That his need to diminish you is a confession of how fragile he feels. That the loudest man in the room is usually the one most afraid of the silence. You stop being intimidated by him, not because you've talked yourself out of it, but because you can finally see that he is running the very machine you are learning to switch off. I want to be careful here, because there is a counterfeit version of this steadiness, and a lot of men chase it. It is the performance of toughness. The hard jaw, the flat stare, the clipped voice, the refusal to react, that is itself a kind of reaction. That is not calm. That is armor, and armor is heavy, and every man around you can sense the strain of a man holding a pose. Performed toughness is still status anxiety, just wearing a costume. Real calm has no costume. It does not need to be seen as calm. It can laugh. It can admit it doesn't know. It can say "you're right" without flinching. Because it is not defending a position. The tough guy is exhausting to be around because you can feel how much it costs him. The genuinely steady man is a relief to be around because near him the temperature drops and everyone breathes a little easier. That ease is the tell. That is how you and others will know the difference. So the practice, when you are among other men, is not to fix your feelings. The heat will still rise. The old scanning will still start. The practice is to notice the pull toward shrinking or toward dominating, and to decline both. To stay in your own body, to let the other man be whoever he is going to be without needing to adjust yourself to it. To disagree plainly, concede honestly, praise freely, and hold your ground quietly, all from a place that has nothing to prove because it has already decided you are enough. You will find, over time, that the men worth respecting are drawn to this, and the men who need to dominate slowly lose their grip on you because you have stopped supplying the fuel. There is one more arena where all of this gets tested, and it is the one that undoes more men than any boardroom ever could. Because the way you stand among other men is one thing, but the way you stand in front of a woman you want reaches into an older and hungrier part of you, and that is where we turn next. Chapter 11. Women, Wanting and Not Needing. Some hungers a man learns to hide well, and this is the one he hides best. He sits across from a woman he finds attractive, and beneath the calm surface of his face, a small machine is running at full speed. It is measuring. Did she laugh at that? Was that a good answer? Is she losing interest? Should I say something more impressive? He is not really with her at all. He is with the version of himself he hopes she is building in her mind, and he is frantically trying to protect it. This is neediness, and it has almost nothing to do with how much you like the woman. It is about how much you need her to reassure you that you are a man. Let me be careful here, because this chapter can go wrong in two directions, and both are common. One direction turns into the language of manipulation, the scripts and the techniques. The idea that a woman is a lock, and you just need the right sequence to open her. The other direction pretends that desire itself is the problem, that a truly evolved man wants nothing, and feels nothing, and floats above it all. Neither of these is what I am talking about. Wanting a woman, being drawn to her, hoping she wants you back, that is not weakness. That is being alive. The question is not whether you want. The question is whether your sense of yourself as a man survives her saying no. Picture two men on the same evening, meeting two different women, and watch what actually happens beneath the words. The first man, call him Daniel, has been thinking about this dinner all week. He has rehearsed things to say. He arrives early and orders a drink to steady his nerves. When she sits down, everything he does is aimed at a target, and the target is her approval. He tells a story and watches her face the whole time to see if it landed. When she mentions a band he has never heard of, he nods and says he loves them too. When she disagrees with something he said, he immediately softens, backs off, agrees with her instead, because a small alarm went off inside him that said she is pulling away, fix it. He picks up the check with a flourish and waves off her offer to split it, not out of generosity, but because he needs the gesture to mean something to her. By the end of the night, he has been agreeable, accommodating, impressive on paper, and completely absent as a person. She cannot lean on anything, because there is nothing solid there to lean on. Every part of him has been rearranged to please her. And here is the cruel irony he will never understand as he drives home replaying it. She felt that rearranging. She could have named it, but she felt the ground shift every time she pushed, and some quiet part of her concluded there was no ground there at all. Now the second man, call him Marcus. He also finds his companion attractive. He is not pretending otherwise, and he is not floating above it. But something is different, and the difference is not a technique. When she mentions the band he has never heard of, he says, I have never listened to them. Tell me why you love them. When she disagrees with him about something, he considers it, and if he still thinks he is right, he says so warmly, without needing to win and without collapsing. I see it differently, he says, and here is why, and then he grins and asks what she thinks. He is direct about his interest, without groveling for hers. Near the end he says plainly, I have had a really good time, I would like to see you again. There is no strategy hidden in it. If she says yes, wonderful. If she says she does not feel a spark, he will feel the sting of that, because he is human. But it will not rearrange his sense of who he is. He will finish his drink, wish her well, and mean it. Watch what her experience is across from each of these men. With Daniel she is holding something that keeps shifting shape in her hands, and it is exhausting, and it makes her feel oddly alone, even though someone is trying so hard to please her. With Marcus, she is resting against something that holds its shape when she presses on it. That solidity is the single most attractive thing a man brings into a room, and no amount of clever conversation substitutes for it. So what is really going on underneath? The needy man has quietly outsourced his verdict on himself to the woman in front of him. Her interest is the only thing that makes him feel like a man that night, which means she is not a person he is getting to know. She is a judge holding his sentence, and a person can feel when they have been turned into a judge. It is a heavy thing to hand someone. It smells like pressure, and pressure is the opposite of attraction. When you need her approval to feel whole, you are asking her to carry your self-respect for you, and no one wants that job, least of all someone you are hoping to be close to. This is why the willingness to walk away changes everything, and I want to be precise about what that means, because it is easily misread as a cold tactic. It is not a move you make to create scarcity or play hard to get. That is just neediness wearing a costume. Genuine willingness to walk away is the simple internal fact that your life is good and full and standing on its own, so that this particular woman is someone you would be glad to add, not someone you need in order to survive the night. When that is actually true, it radiates off you without your saying a word. You can be warm precisely because you are not desperate. You can be direct precisely because a no would not destroy you. You can listen fully without the little machine running because you are not auditioning. The freedom to lose her is exactly what lets you be fully present with her. And do not think this ends once a woman has chosen you, because neediness does not disappear at the altar, it just changes clothes. Inside a long relationship, it stops looking like a man performing on a first date and starts looking like a man whose whole weather depends on his partner's mood. She is quiet at breakfast and his stomach drops, and he spends the morning trying to read what he did wrong. She is warm and he is fine. She is distant and he is unmoored, so that without ever deciding to, he has handed her a job she never applied for, the daily management of his sense of himself. It comes out as the need for constant reassurance, the checking, the low jealousy that reads a threat into every man she mentions, the sulking that is really a demand to be chased and soothed. None of it feels like weakness from the inside. It feels like love, like closeness, like caring deeply. But a partner can feel the difference between being loved and being leaned on for structural support. And over years, the second one exhausts even a patient woman, because she did not sign up to be the foundation another adult forgot to build for himself. The same principle holds here as everywhere in this book. Bring her a man who already has ground under his own feet, and your love becomes something you offer rather than something you extract. You can give her your warmth without invoicing her for your worth. That is the difference between a relationship that feels like a refuge and one that slowly feels like a job. And it is decided almost entirely by whether you walked in already whole. Now, the honest distinction, the one this whole chapter turns on. Desire is not dependence. Desire says, I want you, I am drawn to you, I would love for this to become something. Dependence says, I need you to want me back or I do not know who I am. Desire is generous and open-handed. It can be spoken plainly and it can survive a no. Dependence is a clenched fist. It cannot bear rejection, because rejection is not experienced as she chose differently. It is experienced as I have been found out. I am not enough after all. You can want a woman with your whole chest and still be free. In fact, only a free man can truly want a woman, rather than wanting the relief she would provide from his own emptiness. And this is not about becoming unreachable or unbothered by love. The goal is not a man who feels nothing when someone leaves. The goal is a man whose foundation does not live inside another person. A woman is not drawn to a man who needs her to prop him up, spending her energy reassuring him, managing his moods, convincing him he is worthy. She is drawn to a man whose stability she can lean on when her own is shaking. Those are two entirely different roles, and you get to choose which one you walk into a relationship carrying. The man who has built his self-respect on the ground beneath his own feet has something to offer. The man still hunting for his worth in a woman's eyes has only a need to fill, and need, however well disguised, is never magnetic. So carry your desire proudly, and carry it lightly. Say what you want, plainly and without apology. Let her be a person, and not a verdict. And build your life so full and so square that any woman you meet is a wonderful possibility rather than a lifeline. The wanting is good. It is the needing that has cost you. There is one feeling we have circled around this whole time without naming it directly. The quiet terror of the mirror, of looking at yourself with no one else in the room to tell you what you are worth. Chapter 12. The Man Who No Longer Needs the Mirror. Late in this work, a certain quiet arrives. And it is not the quiet of an empty room. It is the quiet of a mind that has stopped narrating itself to an imagined audience. You know the old noise well by now. The endless low broadcast of, how am I coming across? The silent replaying of a conversation from 3 hours ago. The rehearsing of a line you might deliver if the right moment ever came. For most of your life, that broadcast ran underneath everything, so constant you mistook it for the sound of being alive. And then one ordinary day, you notice it has gone soft, and in its place is just the thing in front of you. The coffee, the person talking, the task on the desk. You are simply there, undivided, and it feels less like a triumph than like a fever finally breaking. That is the shift this whole journey has been pointing toward, and I want to describe it plainly so you know what you are aiming for, because it does not announce itself with fanfare. The mirror I mean is not glass. It is the habit of checking every thought, every choice, every word against the reflection you imagine in other people's eyes, and adjusting yourself until the reflection smiles back. A man who no longer needs the mirror has not stopped caring about people. He has stopped outsourcing his verdict on himself to them. The difference lives in the body first. Your reactions slow down. Someone says something clipped or careless, and where there used to be an instant flare, a scramble to defend or please, now there is a half-second of space. In that space you get to choose. Most of the time you choose to let it pass, not because you have gone numb, but because you no longer feel the sentence in question as a ruling on your worth. It is just a thing a person said, on a day you know nothing about, for reasons that have almost nothing to do with you. You will notice you rehearse less. The mental theater where you staged conversations before they happened and restaged them after starts to go dark for long stretches, and you get those hours back. You will notice you interrupt less, because you are not lying in wait for your turn to prove something. You will notice, oddly, that you remember conversations better, because you are actually inside them, rather than half present and half managing your image. Presence turns out to be the reward, and it is a large one. So much of the exhaustion you have carried was never the events of your life. It was the second job of monitoring how those events made you look. Let me bring back the man we met at the very beginning, the one standing at the edge of a gathering, drink in hand, running the calculations, reading the room to find out where he stood, laughing a beat too quickly at the important man's joke, feeling the whole evening as a test he was quietly failing. I want you to see him again now, sometime down this road, because the temptation is to imagine he has become someone glamorous and unrecognizable, and that is not what happens. And if you expect that, you will feel cheated by your own progress. Here is what actually changes. He walks into the same kind of room. His heart still lifts a little at the crowd, because he is human and the body is old. But he doesn't immediately scan for the ranking. He finds one person and asks a real question and listens to the answer. And when the answer is dull, he lets it be dull without panic. When the important man makes his joke, he either finds it funny or he doesn't, and his face reports the truth either way, and nobody dies. At one point in the evening, someone says something faintly dismissive to him, and the old him would have spent the drive home prosecuting the case. This man notices the sting, files it as information about the other person's mood, and returns to his conversation. On the way out, he realizes he is not tired in the way he used to be tired. He was just at a party. He was not on trial. Notice how small those changes are. He did not become the loudest man in the room. He did not conquer the gathering. He became a man who could be in the gathering without leaving himself at the door. That is the whole of it, and it is enough. And I want you to lower your expectations to exactly that, because that is where the real freedom lives. The fantasy of transformation, of waking up as a different and impressive stranger, is just the approval hunger wearing a nicer coat. What you are building is not a new man. It is a settled one. There is one more thing that happens, and you will not be the first to notice it, because the people around you will feel it before you name it in yourself. A settled man changes the temperature of the rooms he stands in. When you stop needing the people near you to prop you up, you stop unconsciously pulling at them, and they can feel the pulling stop. Your kids get a father whose mood does not swing on how his day went, who can hear that they are struggling without making it about his own adequacy as a parent. Your friends get a man they can tell the truth to, because you are no longer so fragile that every honest word has to be cushioned. A woman gets a partner she can lean on instead of one more thing to hold up. You become, without trying, a kind of steady ground for other people, and that is not a burden. It is one of the quiet privileges of having built ground of your own. Watch for the small signs that it is taking, because they are undramatic and easy to miss. You will catch yourself not rehearsing before a call. You will hear a piece of criticism and feel the sting pass in seconds instead of days. You will realize an hour after a party that you never once checked how you were coming across. You will be somewhere ordinary, doing something ordinary, and notice that the low background hum you carried your whole life has gone quiet, and that you did not have to do anything in that moment to earn the quiet. It was just there because you built it. I have to be honest with you about the shape of this, because a dishonest ending would betray everything the earlier chapters tried to do. This is not a destination you arrive at and then own forever. There is no certificate. There will be a week, months into your steadiness when something knocks you sideways. A rejection lands. A man you admire looks through you. A season of your life goes quiet, and the old hunger comes back like a taste in the mouth, and you find yourself at midnight auditing your own worth again. When that happens, and it will, I do not want you to read it as proof that none of this took. That reading is the trap. The measure of the work was never that the old patterns vanish. It is that they return with less grip, and that you recognize them faster. You come back to the small promises to yourself. You come back to sitting inside the discomfort without flinching toward the nearest source of reassurance. You come back to the plain, unremarkable practices, and the ground firms up under you again. This is a practice, in the truest sense of that word. You do not finish it, you keep it. And that word, ground, is the one I want to leave you standing on. Think about what ground actually is. It is not a feeling that visits you on good days. It is not the warm glow of having been praised, which fades by morning. Ground is what holds whether or not anyone is watching, whether the day went well or went badly, whether you were seen or overlooked. You have spent these chapters laying it down, one honest act at a time. Every promise you kept to yourself when no one would have known you broke it. Every hour you sat with a hard feeling instead of running to be soothed. Every moment you let someone's disapproval exist without rearranging your soul to fix it. None of those moments felt like much on the day. Not poured all at once, but pressed down slowly, layer over layer, until one day you put your weight on it, and it simply holds. So here is where I leave you. Not fixed because you were never broken, only bent toward an old fear. Not finished because no man worth knowing ever is. Just steadier than you were, with a quieter mind and slower hands, and more of yourself available for the actual living of your life. The mirror is still there on the wall. You can glance at it when you like. But you no longer walk through your days holding it up in front of your own face, asking every passing stranger to tell you whether you exist. You know that you do. You built the proof yourself, quietly, out of 100 ordinary choices, and now you get to stand on it. Feel the ground beneath you. It is not borrowed. It is not on loan from anyone's good opinion, and no one can pull it out from under you, because no one gave it to you. You laid it down. It is yours. Stand there, and go on with your life.